Hello everybody, welcome to the Sims History channel. This is Professor Lilith. This is the first video in my series on photographer James VanDerZee. I'm doing a let's play of his life using The Sims 4. If you happen to follow my Tumblr, I've become fascinated with VanDerZee because during an era when most depictions of African Americans showed you people who were either just the flattest of most uninteresting stereotypes or animalistic brutes, he was taking photographs like these. And to me, when I see people through VanDerZee's eyes, I see them as the way I think that God probably sees them, as fascinating and beautiful and filled with endless potential. I wanted to know more about the person who produced these images, and I thought that it would be something that maybe my viewers would like to know about too. So as a historian, when I go to understand people, I start with where they grew up and how they grew up. I want to know your time and place in the world. And for James VanDerZee, the time and place he grew up in was the last quarter of the century, of the 19th century, the 1800s, in Lenox, Massachusetts. That is, he's from the far northeast of the United States and was, by every possible measure, a Yankee. Lenox is not very far from the state's border with New York State, and it is in the middle of Massachusetts if you look at it from the north and south. And it's also really quite a small town. In the 19th century, it had about 1,100 people living in it. And it is really not in the middle of very much. It's really kind of in the middle of nowhere, except that in the 1880s, Lenox had become a kind of resort town for visiting intellectuals. It had some big, fancy houses, and a lot of people made their living working as servants or working in jobs that provided materials and services for the big houses. And that's what the VanDerZee family did. You can see also that Lenox, like most of Massachusetts, is today heavily wooded. It was not probably as wooded as this back then. A lot of Massachusetts has been reforested since the 19th century. It was largely farmland, and pretty rocky farmland, as is much of Massachusetts. And VanDerZee's family had a little farm, which I will be showing you in a moment. So here you have my attempt to recreate the VanDerZee family home, and you notice I've put it in a sepia tone because it's old-timey. It'll be back in color in a few minutes. James grew up in actually the house that is on the left here. This house on the right is the house of his grandparents, and in the in the photograph that I have of his house and of his grandparents' house, it is that close to them. It's just a little bit behind his parents' home. According to James, the downstairs of his parents' house originally had a kitchen, a dining room, and a 2-room parlor, and the upstairs had 4 bedrooms and a bathroom, which is actually quite an unusual luxury from the period. His grandparents and one set of his aunts ran a laundry that served apparently most of the hotels in town, and his aunts, whose house I just couldn't quite fit on there, but was actually next door, apparently on the other side, his other set of aunts ran a home bakery, which was also apparently the only bakery in town. Now, if you already know something about 19th century African American history, you might be surprised that James did not live in something that looks more like these buildings, which are tenant farmers' homes in the rural South. This one is from as late as 1965. But James was not from the South. He was from Massachusetts. James and his family were not tenant farmers, not sharecroppers, like most African Americans in the South, and Lenox and Massachusetts were not segregated. The big social divide was actually between the summer tourists, who were very wealthy for the most part, and everybody else in Lenox who made a substantial portion of their living taking care of the wealthy tourists. In Lenox, James's mother, Susan Elizabeth, was a homemaker, and his father worked part-time as the sexton for the local Congregational church, and The sexton is kind of the keeper of buildings and grounds, and he put together other odd jobs apparently on top of that. James seems to mostly have remembered him, though, as an avid gardener, and the family apparently ate most of their fruit and vegetables as a result of his work in the garden. In addition to John's job, which provided a regular, reliable, steady income, the family ran 2 small businesses. His maternal grandmother and 2 of his aunts ran quite a large laundry service for the hotels in town, and another set of aunts ran a bakery, which was the only bakery in town, and also catered to the hotels. So the kids did deliveries of laundry and baked goods apparently throughout the Lenox area. You'll have noticed that I have both of these houses filled with educational toys and musical instruments. All of the kids apparently learned to play and or sing musical instruments. Susan Elizabeth was apparently fascinated with astronomy, not astrology, astronomy. They were an intellectually curious, lively family, and that's typical of the middle class of Massachusetts then and now. You know, these are people who... This is a part of the world where everybody believes in education and going to public lectures and bettering themselves through education, and also apparently in setting fires, because of course that's what Sims do if you leave them alone long enough. But in any case, the VanDerZees were part of the culture that James grew up in, just like everybody else, and they were just as interested in intellectual things, and this will make a huge difference in James's life. Now, if you like this video or you're interested in James, I'd encourage you to also look at the series that I'm putting together on Louis XIV, whose life was very, very different from that of James VanDerZee. It actually, in their early life, probably significantly worse. But he was also a kind of Renaissance man. There seems to me to be a lot that they have in common in terms of their interests, and yet I would venture to say that probably James VanDerZee was a lot happier over the course of his life than Louis XIV. And with that little teaser, I wish you a wonderful rest of your web browsing. Bye!